If you've been playing games for a while, you probably have a mountain of unplayed titles in your library thanks to services like Humble, Epic Game Store and PlayStation Plus. And let's be honest, most of them you're probably never going to play. I also have the same problem, and at least for me, it's kind of annoying. I've spent the money on these games and the developers have poured their blood, sweat and tears into making them, so I would want to play them and eventually, at the very least, try every unplayed game that I have in my library. So, to chip away at my backlog, I list all of my unplayed games on Google Sheets, pick 4 games by random, force myself to play them, and take you guys along for the experience. This video is a part of a series, so if you're interested in hearing more about the reasoning behind why I'm doing this, please check the first part of the series out in the description. And here's the Google Sheets formula that I'll use to pick the games from the list. So, without further ado, let's just get into it. For the first game, I got the original Ape Escape, which is an old PS1 platformer that I never played before. And then I got the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is nice. I've been wanting to check this out, so now I have an excuse to finally do it. And then I got Ghostrunner, which is one of the games that I saw on PlayStation Plus that looked kind of interesting. And for the last game, I got Pseudoregalia. I just bought this game on Steam just based on what the screenshots looked like, but it seems to be a 3D platformer Metroidvania, which should be something that I'm into. Alright, so now I'll play all of the games and come back to you with my takes after I'm done. So, I'll see you soon. Ape Escape is a classic platformer by Japan studio where you travel through different time periods, catching monkeys by utilizing the game's stealth, puzzle and fighting mechanics. The game was originally released as a PlayStation exclusive in 1999 during the later stages of the PS1 era and was pretty successful at the time. But after various sequels and spin-offs, including not 1 but 2 Metal Gear Solid collaborations, which honestly look kind of sick, somehow interest in the series had fallen off massively, and it seems like Sony has almost completely abandoned it outside of adding some of the games to the premium list in PlayStation Plus, thanks to which I'm able to play the game now. Now the reason this game got my interest and ended up on the list in the first place is not because I found the concept or the gameplay particularly intriguing or anything, but rather because of the YouTube algorithm coming through and recommending me this really interesting jungle/drum and bass album by one of the pioneers of Japanese jungle and house music, Soichi Terada. Now my electronic music knowledge isn't that deep, so I hadn't heard of Terada at that point. I didn't even know Japanese jungle was a thing, and since I liked some of the tracks on that album, I decided to research a bit, and as I was googling around, I found this story about the director of the Ape Escape series, who, during the first game's development, was such a big fan of the same specific album that he contacted Terada and asked him to do the entirety of the soundtrack to the game. And so I got interested, slapped the game on the list, and here we are today. Ape Escape is filled with charming old-school jankiness. I like how older games from this era made the save point in the hub world into this elaborate thing that's like a fourth wall breaking actual part of the game. And it's funny how the professor, the person telling you what to do, just quietly stares at you for about 10 seconds too long after every cutscene, which I'm assuming is a result of the voice lines being different lengths in different languages. And because of Ape Escape being one of the first games ever that were designed to use both of the analog sticks of the controller, there wasn't a blueprint they could follow at that point. So as a result, the developers had to innovate a lot in terms of the controls. You use the left stick to move around, which is pretty normal, but the right stick is used for almost everything else that you do in the game. For example, when you've equipped the sword, to swing it, you move the right stick towards the direction you want to attack, and when using the slingshot, you pull the stick back and then let it go to shoot, and if you want to do a spin move, you just spin the right stick around to do it. And while by today's standards it feels pretty janky and hard to get used to, it's still a creative control scheme that you can only usually ever find in older games like this. As far as the actual gameplay goes, it's decent. Every level has enemies, obstacles and a certain number of monkeys you have to catch to progress to the next one. And in between the levels, new gameplay mechanics are introduced in the form of gadgets that you can swap around depending on the situation. Sneaking up and catching the monkeys is fun, but the age of the game is definitely felt in the somewhat awkward platforming and combat. But I mean, it's an old 3D game, so it's to be expected. The controls with the right analog stick are pretty hit and miss. Some of the abilities like the slingshot and the spin move feel intuitive, but the direction-based attacks never stop feeling weird to me, and it's not surprising that this kind of thing didn't really catch on. But when it comes to the presentation of the game, thanks to the bold visuals and the awesome music, Ape Escape does a great job of creating a unique atmosphere. The experimental music choices somehow fit really well with the technologically advanced monkey theme of the game, and I love how in some of the big budget games of this period, developers just felt comfortable to be like, fuck it, let's add a spinning rainbow vomit transition screen with a blaring alarm in the background, and no one stopped them from doing it. And this kind of energy can be felt throughout the entire game, all the way from the wacky premise to its colorful art style, and Soichi Terada complements this by absolutely killing it with the music. Like, just listen to these tracks. I just really enjoy this kind of artistic cohesion in a game when a developer just gets one artist to score the entire thing. And it definitely makes a great impact here. Despite there being a lot of variety in the music of the game, it all feels like it belongs together, and the game's atmosphere really benefits from that. And that's about everything I wanted to say about the game. Playing games like this is super nostalgic to me, and Ape Escape is definitely worth checking out if you're into games from this time period and haven't played it before. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a game that reimagines the first 6-ish hours of the original and stretches it to a full 40-hour experience. And the end result is a pretty weird game that I'm not quite yet finished with, but I do have a lot of mixed feelings about. If you aren't already familiar with the story of 7, to quickly summarize the setting, you play as Cloud Strife, an ex-soldier mercenary who gets hired to join Avalanche, a small eco-terrorist group who is attempting to stop a megacorporation from harvesting a substance called Mako, which is, in addition to being the planet's lifeblood, also being used for energy generation. I played Final Fantasy VII as a kid, and while it wasn't necessarily my favorite of the series, I just love 10 too much. It's still awesome seeing all of these characters brought to life with modern graphics, and the remake did almost everyone justice. All of the main cast look great and feel pretty damn faithful in terms of personality considering the original. And the other minor Avalanche members also get a lot more screen time. Jessie has a new completely original section in the game which explores her motivations, and Biggs, who for some reason looks a lot like Charlie Sheen here, has a lot more lines as well. I could have done with less screen time of Wedge though, as unfortunately Square has made the decision to turn his entire character into a recurring joke about how fat and stupid he is, which wasn't that funny in the beginning and got pretty old pretty fast as the game went on. Due to how far that original 6 hours is stretched here, you just get to see these characters in a lot more detail, which mostly works in the game's favor. We get a closer look at Cloud's awkwardness, Barrett's true feelings slipping through the cracks of his hard facade, and the squad just interacting with each other during daily life and missions. It's nice, decently voice acted, and to be honest, it improves upon the original story where a lot of the characters at this point felt a lot more one-note in comparison. That increase in detail is also seen in the dystopian city of Midgar, which you can now experience rendered in modern-day graphics. And it looks fantastic. Most of the game takes place in the slums of the city located below the gigantic pizza-shaped structure where the higher class people live. The slums, left without proper infrastructure and used as a garbage dump, are both figuratively and literally left in the shadows of the upper plate, as the design of the megastructure doesn't allow for natural light to reach the people below. The pizza is mentioned a lot in the original game, but I always found it kind of abstract, as you don't really get a clear view of how it all actually works, which is why I appreciate how ever-present the oppressiveness of Midgar's design is in the remake. You can literally just turn the camera upwards and you'll see the plate from below, which does a great job of selling the atmosphere of the city. But that's about it for the good sides of the remake. While stretching this part of the game to 5 times of its original length had some positive impacts when it comes to character interactions, in terms of story pacing it suffers horribly, especially playing the game as someone who already knows the story. It's true that the parts of the story that were present in the original were adapted well, but when it comes to playing through the filler in between, it's absolutely brain-numbing, mainly for 2 key reasons. First, the content in between the story points consists of hours and hours of dull, repetitive hallways and rooms filled with enemy encounters and bosses, and secondly, by already knowing what happens in the story, you know that nothing of importance is going to happen, which just left me bored out of my mind in these sections, waiting for when we could finally get to the next part where the story actually moves forward. I wasn't a big fan of the combat in this game either, and while Square has made significant improvements in this regard since the Final Fantasy XIII days, their awkward blend of real-time button mashing and old-school turn-based style menus still just doesn't feel that good to me. Pausing the flow of the combat by constantly having to stop and micromanage every character feels jarring. The auto-locking, blocking and dodging is messy and unsatisfying, and there's rarely any real need to think about what you're doing when it comes to the tactical side of it, since it's usually enough to just spam the strong moves and heal until you win, which makes this entire part of the game just underwhelming for me. And then there are the changes to the story. And just as a warning, I'm heading into spoiler territory at this point. The Dementors from Harry Potter are here, and instead of an actual remake, it's more like an alternate timeline where the Dementors, or Whispers, which is their real name, are interfering in the game's story, trying to keep the events from straying too far from the original, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Adding this kind of meta element to the story is pretty interesting, and it completely came out of left field for me, but at the same time it's weird. It's cool that they are trying something new, but it also feels like a great opportunity for Square to fuck up a beloved classic by trying to go too crazy with it. And I also imagine that for a player completely new to Final Fantasy VII, the meta elements in the story would come across as pretty damn confusing. But that's about everything I have to say about the game. Overall, it's a pretty mixed bag with some great parts and some pretty massive flaws as well. If you like this style of combat, I'm sure that you'd like the game more than I did, and if you're a new player who wants to try 7, I'd recommend you to just check out the original. Ghostrunner, released in 2020, is a 3D platformer where you climb buildings, dodge bullets, and use your sword to fight enemies in a dark cyberpunk environment. And also, it was one of the games that I only had on PlayStation Plus, and because of this I could only play it with a controller. Which unfortunately didn't go quite as planned. I mean, I tried to play it, but the fast-paced action combined with the awkward controls just made the game needlessly difficult in a really annoying way. And I completely admit that that's a skill issue, but the game also doesn't feel designed to be played on a controller. Maybe it's good on PC, but here it just didn't feel playable enough for me to actually have fun spending the time getting good at it. And that's all I had to say about it. Sorry that you didn't get a real look at it. So to make up for it, I went ahead and rolled for another game instead. And I got Before the Echo. I have no idea where I originally got this game from, but it's been in my Steam forever, but let's see what it's like. Before the Echo is a rhythm game with RPG elements released in 2011 by Iridium Studios. The game starts with the main character waking up in a mysterious tower as a voice tells him through an intercom system that his life is in danger and that he has to climb the tower by fighting monsters and bosses using the rhythm battle system the game is built around. And the way that these battles are designed was honestly the most interesting part of the game for me. So the way it works is that you have 3 different streams of notes that you have to constantly juggle when fighting. 1 for blocking the enemy's attacks. If you miss, you take damage, 1 for collecting mana, and 1 for casting your own attacks. And that's where most of the difficulty comes from. Instead of necessarily having to hit every note, you have to constantly keep an eye out for when the enemy's attacks are coming, so that you can find the right pockets where you can collect some mana and dish out your own moves with relative safety. You win the fight when the enemy's health hits 0, which rewards you with a roll from the enemy's drop table and with some EXP, which makes your stats higher. And that is where the RPG elements come in. When out of battle, you can use these resources to craft other items that either make you stronger or allow you to challenge the boss of the floor that you're currently on. And by beating the boss, you move on to the next floor, get new crafting recipes and new enemies to fight. All of the different systems in this game are pretty creative and fun at first, but after spending some more time with the game, most of the aspects where the game shows its creativity are unfortunately also the parts that made the game a lot more tedious and unfun than it maybe could have been, and I can't help but feel like they cooked just a bit too much in this regard. Like for example during the battles, where juggling the different streams was cool at first, I quickly noticed that the least crucial of them, the mana stream, was the only stream that was actually designed around the music and that feels legitimately good to play. The notes in the two arguably more important streams that control your defense and spellcasting feel random and out of place for most of the time when compared to the music. The notes aren't offbeat or anything, but the difference of feel between them and the mana stream is obvious. And this results in this weird conflict between the notes that are important to hit but don't feel as good, and the less important notes which feel awesome to play. If it was up to me, I'd much rather have it the other way, with the more crucial notes being actually satisfying to play. While the songs are fun, the game also just doesn't have enough of them, which is a tough shortcoming for any rhythm game, and the RPG elements make this part of the game even worse. The fact that you might have to grind for items, fighting the same monster, playing the same song over and over again in order to have a chance of making progress, just isn't fun to me. And the funny thing is that when you do get the items you need, it's still possible to fail the crafting process, causing you to lose even more EXP and have to go back to grinding the same songs you just played before. This actually happened to me before the second boss in the game, where I just wasn't able to get the polish remover drop from the violent dwarf enemy, and after multiple fights when I finally got it, I failed to craft the key to the boss room and had to go back to grind the same monsters again. After some time I did eventually make it to the boss room though, and after I beat him, before letting me continue on to the next floor, something surprising happened in the story. A mysterious person I hadn't seen before ambushed me and summoned a new monster to fight me. But when I realized that the song in this new surprise fight and in the boss fight just before it was the exact same song, it became clear to me that I just didn't want to play the game anymore, and then I dropped it at that. I didn't get too far into the game, so I don't have much to say about the story, but for the parts I did see, the writing felt extremely edgy to me, which thanks to its absurdity, sometimes resulted in funny moments.
What the hell is this? Am I on crystal meth?
But other times was just a bit too cringe and weird for me to enjoy it even in a campy way. To wrap it up, Before the Echo is a game that brings forwards some interesting ideas in regards to rhythm game mechanics, but fails to combine them into an actually enjoyable game. And yeah, it wasn't really my thing. Pseudoregalia is a fairly short 3D platformer Metroidvania that was actually just released around a month ago by developer Ritzler. The game starts off with a cutscene of the main character Sybil, presumably entering the castle the game takes place in through a mirror. And for the rest of the game, you're left to figure everything out on your own, as you're pretty much given zero direction in regards to where to go and what to do. The game works like a normal Metroidvania with platforming as its main focus. You explore the castle, doing platforming challenges and fighting enemies while finding new movement abilities you can use to reach places that were previously unreachable. And to start this off, I have to say that I really enjoyed this game. And one of the main reasons for why is because of just how snappy and polished the platforming feels. The clear sound design and distinct animations that accompany your actions result in this super high level of responsiveness, and it never feels like you're not in control. This clarity also is emphasized by always having the character's model visible by displaying its silhouette when behind objects, walls or anything, so you always see what's happening regardless of how chaotic it gets. Thanks to the Metroidvania elements, the platforming itself never gets stale as you constantly find new abilities that you can use to get to new places. The abilities are all versatile and fun to use, especially the wall kick, and allow for a lot of self-expression, which also gives the game this feeling that is very similar to Mario Odyssey, of like where you feel that you could reach any place you wanted if you just got creative enough with the tools given to you. Pseudoregalia's blocky retro art style is reminiscent of old Nintendo 64 or PlayStation 1 games, but instead of feeling like a straight imitation, it manages to create its own vibe while still benefiting from the style's nostalgia factor. The grey, comfortable eeriness of the mostly empty hallways give the game's environments a feeling of almost liminality, and the dreamlike color palette makes the game feel like you were actually, well, inside a dream. And this is all enhanced by the game's fantastic soundtrack, which has some very pretty, calming, bittersweet and also high energy tracks that fit the game's atmosphere perfectly. In terms of story, the game doesn't give you much to work with until the very end, where the purpose of the game and Sybil's actions are finally revealed. And I'm not going to spoil it here, but I did enjoy the way it ended. And I also like this kind of storytelling where the actual text-based information is scarce, and the feeling created by the other elements of the game is instead in the forefront, and it's up to you to piece it all together. It's not all perfect though, and the game does run into some issues, especially when it comes to figuring out where you are and how you can get to where you are supposed to go. While running through the game at first and tackling every platforming challenge in your way was completely fine, because of how non-linear and connected the different areas of the world are, attempting to backtrack to some specific room you saw an hour ago was a different story. There were many points in my playthrough where I felt completely lost and like I had accidentally made my way into some area that I wasn't yet equipped to deal with, and the lack of a map didn't make this any easier. Comfortably traversing the map would basically require me to memorize every part of the game, and at least in my case, I'm not that great with directions. I felt like the map was just too complicated for me to actually be able to do that during the somewhat short playtime. The combat in the game is also just okay. It gets the job done fine, but is underwhelming, especially in contrast to the fantastic platforming, which thankfully is the main focus of the game. But also when it comes to the platforming, I feel like it could have been a lot harder, at least in some of the optional stuff. I mean, since the platforming feels so good and fluid, it would have been cool to see some Path of Pain type shit, to see how that fluidity and control would have translated when the difficulty is turned all the way up. But all in all, despite my minor complaints of it, I cannot understate how fun this game is. I legitimately had trouble putting it down when I had to stop playing, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that it has the best 3D movement that I've played with since like Mario Odyssey. So I'd say that if you like platforming, you should highly consider checking this game out. It's pretty damn cheap too. And that's all of the games for this time. The randomizer came through with some really solid and interesting picks that I'm glad I got the excuse to play because of doing this challenge. And again, I'm a step closer towards clearing my backlog. but let's be honest, I'm still buying games, so I don't think I'll run out of them anytime soon. If you also have a huge backlog that fills you with dread every time you look at it, I encourage you to try this as well. And if you do end up doing this, please let me know how it went in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more stuff like this. I also make analysis videos about games in general, so check the rest of my channel out if that kind of thing interests you. And thanks again. Bye.